Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller along with Manny Hill here. Normally we would be live on YouTube on a Thursday night, but I lost my voice as we were at the Lynx game and I was screaming to you and my wife there as loud as it was the other night when they beat the Connecticut Sun to advance to the WNBA Finals. So that was a good time, but I don't have a lot left as far as the voice goes. Yeah, you have something going on tonight as well. So we picked a good week, the bye week, to have some things get in the way. But we are here nonetheless because we owe you lots of football talk. And without the Vikings playing, thought it would be a good idea, Manny, to dive into this slate, do a little preview. We don't ever get to talk about these other teams in depth. So we'll talk about all the games that are relevant to the Minnesota Vikings, as well as some pick'ems as well from Underdog Fantasy, and we will have a grand old time. So, Manny, I want to start out with the first game on the slate that is relevant to the Vikings, and that would be a London contest between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Chicago Bears. And how about this? Each game, I'll ask you a question about the game, then you ask me a question about the game. So, how much does it mean to you how Caleb Williams plays in this game, following up a very, very good performance against the Carolina Panthers, another fairly easy opponent in the Jacksonville Jaguars? But if he starts stacking weeks, that could be pretty big for the Chicago Bears franchise.
Absolutely. And, we've talked about, when I've been picking the schedule the last couple of weeks, we've always been kind of looking at that game, that first game against the Bears at Soldier Field as a game that the Vikings could potentially lose because, Soldier Field is always a tough place to play for the Vikings. Although we saw Kirk Cousins kind of play, get some wins there the last few years that he was here. But it's always a weird place to play for the Vikings, whether the Bears are really good or even if they're like one of the worst teams in the league. It always tends to be kind of a tricky environment for them to go to. So I think one of the things that we're going to have to monitor, and you mentioned it, is how Caleb Williams kind of progresses over the course of this season up until that game. Obviously, he didn't start out very good this year, but we're starting to see him kind of pick things up the last couple of weeks. And this is going to be another game where, all right, the London game, early morning start, kind of a tricky place to play. We talked about this when the Vikings were getting ready to play the Jets, how sometimes these London games can get tricky. Sometimes they can be low scoring. Well, the Bears have already played a few of those low scoring, sloppy, tricky kind of games this season. And they've been able to come out on top on some of them too. So this is going to be another one where you're like, all right, what sort of growth do we see from Caleb Williams? How does he handle, going over to London, preparing for a game like this? The Jaguars are not a good team. They're 1-4. Their coach might be in trouble. But there's still some talent there. So it can be kind of one of those, all right, it'll depend on how Caleb Williams performs. Because if he doesn't play well, this could be a game that Jacksonville could win, and that could put the Bears in an interesting spot.
Yeah, and the Jacksonville thing is just weird in itself because it feels like they have the talent to be much better than they are. And some of their losses this year, I'm just atrocious. They lost to Cleveland, which no one should be losing to Cleveland. They scored 13 points in that game, got blown out by 37 points against Buffalo. They had a more competitive game last week against Houston, and then they beat Indianapolis, where Trevor Lawrence threw for 371. And maybe they found something a little bit in the running game. And their rookie wide receiver, Brian Thomas, has actually been really good so far this season. So they're not a complete joke the last 2 weeks going into this game. But if Chicago is legit, it's kind of the same thing we were saying about the Vikings and the Jets. If Chicago is going to cause any threat in the NFC North, this is the type of team that you pretty easily beat, I think. But as it pertains to Caleb Williams, that's absolutely the way that I'm going to be thinking of it, is just monitoring how he progresses. I like that phrasing. He starts out, every quarterback, if they don't have 2 good weeks to start out, then they're a bust and they're not any good and all that stuff. We've done that with all the rookies so far. But the way that he's started to operate the offense a little bit more effectively and efficiently in his comfort. And I saw DJ Moore say this week something about how he's become a little more bossy, but that's a good sign for them that he's taking over a little more ownership of that offense. and they do have a pretty solid defense. So their last couple of games, they beat the Rams and then Carolina pretty handily. And two of his last three games, he's gone over 300 yards passing. This will be just one of those, where does he stand, even if it is a weird London type of game? And then if he does throttle Jacksonville and he does start putting together start after start that's good, I mean, not only do those games get a little harder on the Vikings schedule, even if I would lean toward Brian Flores versus Caleb Williams, but it also makes you think about, and I'm not trying to make Bears Jaguars this, okay, but it makes you think about where this is going for Chicago over the next few years and just what the Vikings have to do to stay neck and neck with them. I'll be thinking about that as I'm watching the game. Clearly, it doesn't determine where their future is, but if he's got three of his last four games over 300 yards and he's looking like more of a franchise quarterback early on, well, you kind of have to act accordingly as the Vikings, thinking about what you're going to have to do to compete against them, as well as the Packers and against Detroit. What is your question about this game?
Well, and you kind of mentioned it already, but I was going to ask you about kind of your impressions of the Bears defense. I mean, obviously Matt Eberflus is pretty good defensive mind. He's really good at putting together schemes and everything. I'm looking at their schedule. They have only allowed in these first 5 games, they've only allowed more than 20 points one time. Even in the 2 games that they've lost, they gave up only 19 points to the Texans, and then when they lost to the Colts, that's when they gave up the 21 points. Otherwise, they've given up 17 to the Titans, 18 to the Rams, and they blew out Carolina 36-10 this past week. So, what are your impressions of this defense? They haven't really, outside of Houston, they haven't really seen like a real juggernaut offense yet. So you kind of wonder, okay, how will they play against more stiffer competition? But what are your kind of impressions on this unit so far?
I think there's a very clear moment for their defense when they started to be kind of scary, which is when they traded for Montez Sweat last year.
Yeah.
That they didn't have any real one dude that could cause somebody problems on a consistent basis. And even though he's only got 2 sacks, I think that he is such a difference making type of player and he draws so much attention. And they've been able to build it pretty nicely. They have, I think, maybe a top 3 corner and Jalen Johnson on their team. And Matt Eberflus, I don't know about him as a head coach still, because they went through the whole tank thing, and it's really hard to evaluate a coach when you're dealing with that type of franchise turmoil to go down to the bottom and so forth. But the way that Eberflus's defenses have played against the Vikings, I've been very impressed. You remember the game at Soldier Field that Tyson Bagent came in and threw the interception at the end? That was about as miserable of an offensive performance as the Vikings have put on in a while. And then there was the 12-10 game, or whatever the final score there was. And again, it was Josh Dobbs was kind of doing well, and then suddenly he runs into that wall that is the Chicago defense. So when the Vikings do play them, I expect it to be kind of knockdown, drag out battle with this defense because they are more complete. They've spent a good amount of money on it. And as far as Jacksonville goes, that they might be looking for a new head coach the same way that the Jets were after they come home from this one. Because if you go to London and get the doors beaten off of you, or whatever it is, doors blown off, I think they blow off in the cliche, the doors blown off you, then they might be deciding to make a change there. And I think, just real quick, Jaguars question for you while we're rolling on this. Is Doug Peterson not good anymore, or is Trevor Lawrence just the most overrated prospect that's ever happened? And that also got him paid? Because I saw somebody put his statistics through this many games up against Sam Darnold, and they looked very similar, which is
Mm.
incredible. And I think we all gave him a pass for the Urban Meyer thing, but he's just never become what they expected him to be, this generational type of Andrew Luck prospect. But I also wonder if Doug Peterson kind of had his day with Philadelphia and has never really been the same since. Hang on. Let me silence my phone real quick so I can tell you that Us Days at US Cellular is back again. Exclusive offers just for customers, just to say thanks. Right now, you'll get $1,200 off any phone plus $400 off any tablet. Amazing, right? But my family is so excited about their new devices, they keep texting me during the show. They're all about Us Days deals like $1,200 off any phone, $400 off any tablet. Terms apply. Visit uscellular.com for details.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like with Doug Peterson, they have that magical year in Philadelphia where Carson Wentz is having an MVP season, then he gets hurt, Nick Foles comes in and they end up winning the whole thing. And then you remember he lost, I think Frank Reich was the offensive coordinator, I think, for that team
Yep,
that year.
yep,
And
he
he
was. Yep.
and he became the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts after that. Um, and so really after that, the Eagles just weren't very good, and then he got himself fired out of there, and then goes to Jacksonville, and it's kind of the same kind of thing where they have a nice season where they make the playoffs, they kind of recover from the Urban Meyer debacle, they have the big comeback in the wild card round against the Chargers. They play the Chiefs really tough in the second round. But they really haven't been able to build on that at all, and they got off to a pretty good start last year and then just completely melted down and fell apart and gave the division away. And they're off to a terrible start this year, and now you kinda wonder, like, does Doug Peterson just kinda have a shelf life where wherever he goes as a head coach, where it might work okay for a year or 2, and then after that, when the expectations now follow that, he's not really able to build on it, and so, yeah, I know, and with Trevor Lawrence, I can't explain it. He was everybody's next Andrew Luck. I looked at it and I loved him coming out of Clemson. He was a huge winner, winning a national championship game, beating Nick Saban in a national championship game at Clemson. And it just really hasn't, outside of that big playoff comeback against the Chargers, it's been a lot more bad stuff, I think, that we've seen from Trevor Lawrence than good. And now, they paid him already. So now it's like, all right, you change the head coach, maybe. Where do they go from here? Who do you bring in? How is that going to work out? There's going to be some questions, I think, for Shad Khan and that whole organization to answer.
It's kind of a big game for both teams. Like if Jacksonville wins, that division is so mid that they could kind of hang in and try to
Yeah.
make a comeback in the division and chase for the playoffs. But for Chicago, if they win, they can make an argument. Hey, we're right in the middle of the playoff race amongst a bunch of teams that are 3-2, 2-3, fighting in the NFC, looking up at the Minnesota Vikings. Let's move on to the Arizona Cardinals and Green Bay Packers. When I was watching San Francisco, Arizona the other day, it was 23-13. And I was feeling like my preseason Arizona could be pretty good takes were just going down the toilet. Like, oh man, I guess they stink again. I don't know. Kyler's overrated. I don't know, all this stuff. That's how I'm feeling as San Francisco's winning. And then suddenly the light goes on for Arizona. They end up coming back, winning that game. Kyler has been a total roller coaster this year for Arizona. I think they do have a pretty good coach. They're going to Green Bay. Always difficult to go from Arizona to Green Bay, but this one, this one is probably pretty tight. It's between two teams that are competitive but flawed, and one where I think Jordan Love, who had a kind of an up and down day against the Rams last week, he needs to get on track from the Green Bay perspective. Of course, from the Vikings perspective, everyone's hoping that he doesn't, but he needs to get back on track to where he was in the second half of last year, because he has a tough first game, gets injured, comes back, plays the Vikings. It's pretty ugly. Then plays this game against the Rams, which is also pretty ugly, and they find a way to win. I am curious to see if we do get the 2023 last 8 games type of version of Jordan Love, or if it's still as erratic as it was early in the year last year.
It feels like these games that we've seen Jordan Love play in this year have been kind of a microcosm of what his entire first season as a starter last year was, where it's just some inconsistency, bad for a long stretch, and then like fantastic for, a stretch following that. And we've kind of seen that in games that he's been in so far. I mean, with the Vikings, we saw he had a miserable first half and then was fantastic in the second half and brought the Packers back into that game. And it was kind of the same thing, kind of a mixed bag again last week against the Rams. You just have to wonder, at what point does Jordan Love just put together a complete performance for a 60-minute football game? I think this is an opportunity for him to do it. I don't know if Arizona's defense is very good. It looked pretty bad at some points this year. And it's really been their offense and Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. that have been able to kind of keep them and help them win some of these games. So I think this is a game that has a chance to have a lot of points put on the board. It's going to be really entertaining because you've got two quarterbacks that are kind of in their mid-20s that are really talented with their legs and with their arms, and they both got weapons to throw to as well. So it's going to be fun. I think we're going to see some fireworks, and you know, with the Packers, kind of similar to your point with the Bears, like if they win this game, now that moves them, I think, to what, 4-2, and now
Yep.
they're right
Yep.
there in the conversation for a wild card spot, certainly, and they're in the conversation for the division as well because they're looking right up at the Lions and the Vikings as well. So this is a big game, and for Arizona too. I mean, they're 2-3, and they've had a pretty impressive comeback win against the Niners last week. They blew the doors off the Los Angeles Rams earlier this year, and had a tight loss to Buffalo, and a close loss to the Detroit Lions too. Didn't play so well against Washington, but this is a team too that, like, hey, if they can win a couple games in a row and get themselves into the mix, and they're right there for that division too, because Seattle might not be as good as we initially thought. San Francisco's banged up with injuries. The Rams don't look all that great right now. So Arizona's right there, and this win could really build their confidence and get them going in the right direction.
No, it could for both teams. This sort of a momentum building potentially. I know if we're going to try to work in as many cliches as we can, but it another game that kind of swings how these teams feel about each other or about the rest of their schedule. Not each other so much, but Kyler Murray this year, 99.1 quarterback rating and has 247 yards rushing at 10 yards per rush attempt. He's really bounced back to more close to the Kyler Murray we saw a couple of years ago. And I remember ever so briefly having a discussion about whether the Vikings would trade for Kyler Murray if he was out there. And my thought was, I don't love it because of the price tag and because he's flawed, but it would be a heck of a lot of fun. And he's been coming back to the fun and entertaining quarterback that he used to be a couple of years ago before the organization collapsed and before he got the ACL injury. And then last year is kind of a lost season for him because he's still dealing with the recovery from the ACL. But what I'm really wondering about this game is just how good the Packers defense is. Against the Vikings, they certainly showed something in the second half of that game. The Vikings handled them pretty well. But I saw a stat today, maybe it was Warren Sharp, I don't remember who tweeted this out, about the quarterbacks that have faced the toughest opposing pass defenses. And actually, Sam Darnold was fifth on the list of facing the toughest pass defenses so far this year. And well, we definitely saw that against the New York Jets, but
Yep.
the Packers are really in there as well. And I think if they shut down Kyler and they do a really good job here, then that's another one we're looking at as this Packers defense. They might be a more complete team than they've been in the past, where they've had to mostly be offensive type of teams, but they finally moved on from their defensive coordinator, which they were strangely committed to. And now they've been playing a lot better. And they were really good last week against a banged up Arizona team or a Los Angeles team. So I guess the biggest question here for you, Manny, is if Jordan Love has a great game against Arizona, are you going to think that he's still in store for a great season? Do you think he's going to be a roller coaster? Will this not change your mind at all?
It probably won't change my mind at all. I feel like I need to see it, this week and in the weeks coming after that. They got Arizona this weekend. The following week, they're hosting the Houston Texans. That can be a challenging matchup for him. And then they visit Jacksonville on October 27th. So this is an opportunity, I think, for this coming Sunday. Put something together against the Cardinals defense that you should be able to move the ball on a little bit, and then come back the following week against a pretty good pass rush with the Houston Texans, and then you should be able to go on the road and play pretty well against Jacksonville. So I think this is an opportunity for Jordan Love to really, he's a couple of weeks now coming back from that injury. I would imagine this is a time now where he should, in theory, start to really hit his groove and find that consistency that that he really showed in the second half of last season.
Okay, let me ask you another question. Then, if you've got one, you could throw it my way. But another question about this game is each week on the show, you pick the entire schedule. Most of the time, I believe you have picked wins for the Vikings against the Arizona Cardinals. The way that they play against Green Bay, will it influence future Manny picks when you pick the schedule, how they play at Lambeau?
Yes, it will. And really, it kind of starts with them going into San Francisco this past week and finding a way to win that game, keeping it close. They were down by 10 late in the game, but they kept it close, kept themselves in it, and sort of manufactured a nice little comeback to get a road win against a divisional opponent that granted is a little bit banged up, but that's still a huge win that could factor into maybe some tiebreakers later on in the season. And I think they're right there in the conversation. I mean, they're 2-3, but they're right there in the conversation for that division. So if they find a way to win in Green Bay this weekend, it could really factor into how things could potentially go at US Bank Stadium later on this season.
Okay, what's your question for me? Arizona and Green Bay.
It's a great well, let me think here. I think well, my question for you is what do you need to see from Jordan Love to give you the idea that he can really kind of put this together?
So I think last year was really fascinating because if you had mixed and matched the games, it wasn't just 8 that were bad and 8 or 9 that were good and then into the
Right.
playoffs. If they had been every other week, we would have said, well, he's kind of a roller coaster quarterback that has a really good high end. But instead, the narrative was, well, because he finished the season with 8 really good games, he must be that quarterback and not like the up and down type of quarterback. And I think that it's really just to be able to put it together week after week with less erratic play from him. So the decision making just being better because he's kind of played the same way Sam Darnold has, where it's big plays from him and then kind of some crazy stuff. Only I think that teams have dropped some of the bad throws of Darnold this year. And the Rams did not drop the throw that he made out of the end zone. But I don't know that that's ever going to change from Jordan Love, this thing that clicks in his mind. He threw one near pick against the Vikings where he just dropped back. It was like a 50-yard bomb. And then there was another one where he did throw a pick, same deal, where Byron Murphy Jr. got it. And
Yeah.
why are you doing that at this point in the game? The situational awareness from Jordan Love and the decision making from Jordan Love, again, this won't be decided this week against Arizona, whether it's there or not. But as he extends this sample size of, oh, why did you make that throw? Having too many of those, I will wonder if we're looking at more of a up and down type of quarterback from him and not, hey, this is Aaron Rodgers again, where you should be afraid of the high end, but the low end is that he's going to throw 3 picks against your team. So I am curious to see how that plays out. I want to move to the afternoon slate, one that I cannot wait to watch. The Detroit Lions and the Dallas Cowboys. Manny and I got some Underdog fantasy pick'ems here for this one as well. But I guess the biggest question here is obvious. Is Dallas back after winning it 1:00 in the morning Eastern against the Pittsburgh Steelers in a rainy, wet, gnarly game where they were missing a couple of players? They're down bad at the defensive end position. I don't know if Parsons is coming back for this week or not. But this is at Dallas. Feels like a huge game for them. If they beat the Detroit Lions, there's the question. Is Dallas back as a legitimate NFC squad?
My answer to that is still TBD because in my mind, and I think in the minds of a lot of people that have been paying attention to the Dallas Cowboys, really ever since even going back to the Tony Romo days, what they do in the regular season really doesn't mean a whole lot because we've seen them put together really good regular seasons for, I mean, going back more than a decade, going back to the Romo days. it always comes down to what do they do in the postseason. And for so long, we have seen this team put together 10, 11, 12, 13 win seasons and then just absolutely piss it away in the playoffs. And so to me, it's like, all right, you beat Detroit. If you beat Detroit this week, okay, cool. You've won a few games in a row now, and you've been able to do it without your best player on defense. Great, cool. You're probably going to win this division, depending on what happens with Washington, and Philadelphia doesn't look very good right now. All right. So if you go like 11-6 or 12-5 and win this division, none of it's going to matter because unless you do something in the playoffs, it's just going to be like every other season that we've seen from this team. So to me, I don't right now. I don't even feel like it's the Cowboys are back or that they're gone. I think it's just TBD. I think they're just here. This is kind of par for the course for what they do every year. What happens with them in January, I think, is going to be the ultimate determining factor of if they're back or not.
So there is some element that is relevant as far as whether they are back as a regular season team or not to the Vikings, which is number one, if they are and they meet preseason expectations and where they've been the last few years and get really hot and on a run, that they could be a team that the Vikings compete with for the entire NFC as we look forward, way forward down the schedule, that Dallas is still capable of reeling off 6 wins in a row or 5 out of 6 or something. They've still got the talent on that team to be able to do that. But what I've noticed about Dallas is that everything just feels harder. And playing in Pittsburgh, we know how hard that is. So, not shocking that they would have a difficult time there offensively. But with the injuries that they have, feels like that hasn't really been the case in previous years. And then you look at the running game, that's been a staple for so long when Dallas has
Yeah.
had good teams. Ezekiel Elliott, there's not a whole lot left there. He's averaging 3 yards a carry. He's got 98 yards on the season, no runs over 10 yards. Rico Dowdle is the ultimate just the guy. His longest run is 13 yards. That means that they have not had a run from a running back this year longer than 13 yards. So they are asking Dak Prescott to do everything on that offense. And I just don't think that that's a very sustainable way to play. And they also have to just pump the ball to CeeDee Lamb constantly. I mean, I suppose that if Jalen Tolbert, who caught that touchdown the other night, emerges as a weapon, that's good for them. But they don't have that second, third receiver that is dangerous. And I would think, and I guess we should have been picking these games along the way. We'll go back and do that. But I mean, I just don't think that they could keep up with a team like Detroit if they don't have multiple weapons. They're a little bit short on defense. They can't run the football. They're just not the same. They strike me as more of a 8 or 9 win type of team that is kind of struggling to get into the playoffs. As far as Detroit, though, on the road, going to the Dallas Cowboys, what would it say about Detroit and what type of extra juice would it add to the eventual Vikings Detroit matchup if Detroit, let's say they blow the doors off of the Dallas Cowboys? What would you make of that if Detroit can win this game?
Well, I'll kind of piggyback off of your Cowboys question and say that if the Lions go into Jerry World and blow the doors off of the Dallas Cowboys, I think it just basically says the Lions never left. That they are just the same team that we anticipated them to be going into this season. They were obviously a fantastic team that was on the doorstep of the Super Bowl last year. And I think if they go in and take care of business and dominate this Cowboys team that's a little bit wounded right now, if they do that, then I think it just kind of solidifies that, yep, this is the team that we thought they were going to be. This is one of the front runners in the NFC right now, especially with San Francisco kind of banged up right now. We don't really know what's going to happen with the Niners the rest of the season. And it just heightens this matchup between them and the Vikings coming out of the Vikings bye in week 6. So, or week 7, I should say. So, yeah, I think that this is an opportunity for Detroit to just put a stamp on this first sort of third of the season and say, yep, we're still here. We're still that team. Don't forget about us. We're not the same old Lions that are just going to fade off after a good season. last year was not a fluke. We're serious business for sure.
Yeah, and they just haven't really been quite the same. The Seattle game was what I expected Detroit to look like all year. They had that
Yeah.
kind of grindy loss against Arizona. They just haven't seen Jared Goff get in the same type of rhythm until that game where he completed every pass and was rolling off of their run game. But as far as what they had looked like before the Seattle game, it just wasn't quite on the same level. So if they are putting together multiple games now of dominant play, then we could say, all right, they are who we thought they were. And maybe we should go ahead and crown them because they could be still the team to beat in the NFC. I mean, the Vikings, if Detroit wins this game, the Vikings still only have a 1-game lead over Detroit, which they could lose when they play head to head. So it is big. And I'm sure that Vikings fans are thrilled to be rooting for the Dallas Cowboys in this football game. That's one that probably no one's really going to enjoy. Let's take a look at some of these higher and lowers from Underdog Fantasy, sponsor of this show and our friends. Underdog Fantasy, the easiest place to play fantasy sports, the fastest growing app in the industry as well, which I have here right in front of me and use all the time. You got to check out the pick'ems. That's what we're going to do right now. Very easy to play. Pick between 2 and 8 stats of your favorite players, or even players that are not your favorite that you just want to have fun with, and choose whether they'll go higher or lower. You can win up to 20 times your money by going 5 for 5. Sign up with the code PURPLE to claim your special pick and first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Must be 18 or older. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. And remember, if you use that promo code and play along, it does help the old show here keep going. Here's what I got for you, Manny. Detroit and Chicago. The nation will be watching Jahmyr Gibbs in the backfield. Will he go higher or lower? 81.5 total yards, rushing and receiving. Jahmyr Gibbs.
Against the Cowboys.
Cowboys. Yep, they are really focusing on trying to stop the run these days. They did a good job against the Steelers of doing it. Can they do it against this offensive line of Detroit?
I'm going to say no. I'm going to say Jahmyr Gibbs gets more. It's 81 combined passing.
81.5, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'll say more. I'll say
Higher.
more.
Higher, you'll say.
Higher.
Yes,
Higher, yes.
correct.
Higher.
The buttons say higher right here, as you can see. I agree with you. I think this is a game where they are leaning heavy on the run game, trying to wear down a Dallas team that has some injuries on that side of the ball. And then they've just played brilliantly off of their run with their play action game just since Ben Johnson got there. That's going to start with Jahmyr Gibbs. So I will agree with you on that. Now, how about this number for Dak Prescott? 279.5 passing yards, higher or lower. We were just talking about how he has to do everything, but is he going to press near 300 yards in this game?
This is tricky because on the surface, you would think, well, yeah, I mean, the Cowboys can't really run the ball right now. They're probably going to be behind in this game. So Dak is going to be trying to throw them back into it. But then you also have to wonder, like, okay, if the Lions' run game is clicking and that's going to allow Detroit to really keep the ball for a lot in this game. So will Dak Prescott even have the ball long enough? Will he have enough possessions to even throw for that many yards? So that would be the question for me. But I will say, because of those circumstances I listed, though, I will say he'll have a higher total than 271.
279, but yes.
279,
yeah. I think that he's going to have to throw for 300 yards a game the rest of the way for that team to be good. And there's really no way around it for Dak Prescott and Dallas. One more, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who just demolishes the Minnesota Vikings every time he faces them. Would you give Mr. St. Brown a touchdown in this game? 0.5, higher or lower to score a touchdown?
I'll say higher. Say he'll get one.
Okay. There's no real breakdown that could be done on a touchdown. It's either you just sort of guess yes or no. But he's always a target for Jared Goff in the red zone. His receiving number is 75.5 though, which is also pretty high. Would you go higher or lower on that one?
I'll go higher.
Okay. I'm curious to see if it does end up being one of those kind of short passing games for Jared Goff, where
Yeah.
he's mixing and matching, giving it to Gibbs, giving it to Laporta. Uh, but I mean, Dallas played really well in coverage last week against a Steelers team that had a receiver who wasn't trying. So that's always a hard thing to draw on this sample size. But with Goff, I do wonder if they're going to try to make him a little bit more like low volume throwing and high efficiency, which is what they did really well last week, which could result in someone like St. Brown not getting quite the yardage he has before. I guess we'll see. But anyway, again, play along Underdog Fantasy, and the promo code PURPLE will get you in and get you a special offer. So let's go back. And I got two more games I want to talk about that are very, very exciting from this slate. But let's go back and pick these, Manny, because that's what you do with football games. And I forgot that fundamental thing about talking about football games. Who do you think wins Jacksonville and Chicago?
I think Chicago will win. I think it'll be sloppy, like kind of most of the games that the Bears have been, save for the blowout win over Carolina last week. And it's just these London games are always like that. They're always kind of tricky and sloppy and not always well played. And I just think the Bears are a better team right now. They seem to be hitting on all cylinders, much better than Jacksonville is. And so I'll take the Bears to win that one.
I agree with you. I think that Jacksonville is just a mess. They have played better lately, but I don't know. I don't trust them. Green Bay and Arizona at Green Bay. Who wins that one?
This is hard.
This is
Because
hard.
I actually really like the way Arizona has played this year. I mean, they had a bad game against Washington, and Washington might be legit good, as we're maybe finding out. But everybody else they've seemed to have really close games with and been very competitive with. So this is kind of a tricky one. I will say the Packers will win. I'll give the Packers the win, but I think it'll be very, very close. I think this is going to be a really fun game to watch.
So maybe the win and not covering. ESPN bet here is where I'm looking, and they have 4.5-point favorites for Green Bay. I don't know if they can win this by a touchdown. I might go Arizona here. I might go, and maybe I'm too influenced by watching what they did last week, but I've just been impressed by they
Me
have a
too.
guy, their offensive coordinator Drew Petzing, who comes from the same coaching staff with Kevin Stefanski back here in Minnesota. So I think they do have a good coaching staff. I like the way Murray's been playing. So I might go with the upset Arizona. I also just feel like I could be wrong here, Manny, but Lambeau Field just doesn't scare like it used to scare. I think maybe
Especially
that
not this time of the year either. I mean,
right,
it's
right.
not cold yet. Like, yeah, it seems like anybody can kind of go in there and play well enough to win.
It's not quite as spooky. Maybe it was only spooky because of Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre. You could share this with your Packer friends and they'll get all mad. Let's see. Detroit and Dallas. How do you think that game goes?
I think Detroit is going to win this thing
Yep.
running away. I think literally like running away. I think Detroit's going to run the hell out of the ball. I think Jameer Gibbs is going to have a big day. The Cowboys have struggled against the run this year. I know they were a little better against the Steelers last week, but um, yeah, I just think the Lions are clear cut a better team. The Cowboys are too banged up. I think the Lions are going to control this game and win pretty big.
Okay. I think the Detroit wins this game as well, and Dallas is sent into a state of basically peril. And we're talking about Mike McCarthy not making it into the middle of the season if it goes that way for them. If Detroit loses this game to Dallas, I have to admit, it does take a little bit of the shine off of Vikings Detroit. You also don't want that if you're the Vikings. You don't want Detroit to be piping mad coming off of a loss to Dallas that's disappointing. You kind of want them to be feeling good about themselves and also get into a long, dragging overtime game in Dallas and then have to come to Minnesota and deal with the sound. So how it plays out will be worth watching as well. I have two more games. Obviously, Tennessee, Indianapolis. No, I'm just kidding. I don't care about that game at all. But there are two more really compelling games on the list here. Baltimore and Washington. Here's my question for that one. Would you rather have Lamar Jackson or Jaden Daniels right now? And you have to take the contracts, the age, injury history, all into account. You just get to take one and they're your franchise quarterback, Lamar or Jaden Daniels.
Oh, I do love them both.
Hmm.
I'll still say Lamar because what Lamar has accomplished so far in these first, half decade as a starter with the two MVPs, a trip to the AFC Championship game, I know exactly what I'm getting with Lamar Jackson, and he's still at a young enough age where he can still get even better than where he's at already right now. So I will take Lamar. And also, I mean, Jaden's been really good, but it is Cliff Kingsbury calling plays for him, and Cliff has a tendency to start out really well with things, and then when other teams start to kind of figure things out, the offenses tend to struggle a little bit. So I'm still kind of waiting to see, how Jaden Daniels kind of handles all of that when that time is coming, because it's going to come at some point this year. Somebody's going to face them and have enough tape and make some adjustments, and we'll see how he kind of handles that. So with all of that said, I'll say right now, because there's a little bit more of an unknown with Jaden Daniels, I'll stick with Lamar Jackson.
I would probably as well, because every year Lamar gives you a chance to win a Super Bowl, and he's been very close. And Josh Allen and Lamar are looking at themselves like, what would we be without this Mahomes guy here all the time? And
Right.
so you would do that. But when the contract gets considered and the injury history, Lamar has been banged up throughout his career, and he is incredibly expensive. And Jaden Daniels has been really unbelievable to watch.
It's really
There's a
good.
couple of plays in his last game and this is where you talk about Cliff Kingsbury, but that break down, and he's so miraculous at keeping his eyes downfield. His flicking of the arm and the ball explodes off of his arm. He has got to be the top 3 deep ball thrower in the entire NFL already, which we did know in college, but you're never really 100% sure when someone has great wide receivers in college. Are they going to do that again in the NFL? And he is definitely doing that. And it just looks like his movements are so quick that even if he misses a read, and I've been watching some film breakdowns and stuff like that on Daniels because I'm captivated. And even if he misses a read or doesn't see a defense right away, he could just make up for it with a quick release, a quick movement in the pocket, escaping the pocket and running. This is a team now that is being run competently with a pretty good head coach who's been to a Super Bowl before
Yeah.
and a rising star young quarterback. If you were going to pick just right now teams to put your money on to win a Super Bowl in the next 5 years, Jaden Daniels, Washington, they have emerged from the complete irrelevance and darkness of the NFL all of a sudden. This I cannot wait to watch. I mean, this is sort of the guy in his prime versus the next guy up. It's really, really exciting matchup there. Who do you think wins this one?
Oh man, I love this game. This is going to be so much fun with these two quarterbacks. I think both of these head coaches are very good. I think Dan Quinn's a pretty good coach. I think things ended pretty badly in Atlanta for him, but again, to your point, he got that team to a Super Bowl, and I think he's a quality head coach. And it just feels like Washington, they're emerging from the Dan Snyder era, and now they've got good ownership. Now it seems like they've got competent coaching. It just feels like things are starting to come together for that franchise in a good way. Um, I will say this though, I do think that right now Baltimore seems to be a team that's really on a mission right now, finding a way to win that game against Cincinnati last week wasn't perfect. Gave up a lot of points, gave up a lot of yards, but they found a way to win the way like championship teams find a way to win. And of course, they haven't won a championship with this group yet, but they have the makeup of a team that can make a run to the Super Bowl. And I think them being at home in their comfort zone, I think will put them over the top. But this is going to be a fascinating game to watch for Washington too, because this is kind of the first real big challenge that they're going to have. They're off to a great start, haven't really beaten anybody, super serious yet. Their game against Arizona was really impressive, but and winning in Cincinnati was pretty good too. But this is going to be like that first real huge test for them, and I'll be fascinated to see how they turn out, how they play. But I'll give Baltimore the win.
I will too, but man, Baltimore just feels like they're barely escaping in some of these
Yeah,
games. And I'm not really quite sold that they're as strong as they have been in the past. Their win against Buffalo was really, really impressive, though. And then being able to win in a shootout against Cincinnati, it's a great one. This is maybe the matchup of the weekend that I'm most fascinated by. And the Monday night game, Buffalo and the New York Jets, the newly coached New York Jets. I think honestly, Manny, this is one where the Jets are going to be a force to kind of be reckoned with a little bit here because Rodgers, he just got a coach fired. There's going to be a lot of motivation against this team. Also, on the other side, we just watched the Vikings struggle a lot against this Jets defense. And Josh Allen, the way he threw the football the other day against Houston was atrocious. I don't know what their answer is on offense because they don't have a top receiver to keep going back to over and over. And now James Cook is hurt too. So they don't really have a run game to lean on. They just don't have a heck of a lot around Josh Allen. DJ Reed is phenomenal, maybe playing the best football of any corner in the league. Sauce Gardner is absolutely fantastic. They pressure the quarterback. I think that this is one where they get that we just fired the coach boost and that the Jets are going to give the Bills a hard time. And then we're going to come out of it, if that's the case, saying, are the Bills kind of frauds now?
Yeah, and also with the Jets too, not only, with Jeff Ulbrich taking over as head coach, Nathaniel Hackett's been demoted. He's not going to be calling plays anymore, that's kind of interesting because that's Aaron Rodgers' guy. That's his buddy. And so I think Downing is going to take over now calling plays for them. He's been their quarterback's coach, I think. So that, what sort of juice that gives to the Jets offense will be interesting to see in this game. I'm kind of with you. I think the Jets find a way to win this game. I think the boost of having a new head coach in place now, I think is going to factor into it. They're at home, and Buffalo just hasn't looked very good the last couple of weeks after looking pretty good the first couple of weeks of the season. But now I think they've been kind of challenged the last couple of weeks against better competition, Baltimore, Houston, two teams that are right there in the playoff mix. I think we may be starting to see the real Buffalo Bills, which is a team that I think you kind of picked like it's a team that can probably fall back and might not even make the playoffs in 2024. So I think the Jets win this game. It might be close because they're division rivals and it's, they know each other really well, but I think the Jets, with the energy of a new coach, being at home, I think they're going to find a way to win.
Well, my suggestion is to everyone, stick yourself in the couch, a stress-free weekend for you. Chillax, watch some football, enjoy it. We've had a great time. This has been a very chillaxed podcast, just talking about games. And in fact, Manny, this makes me think that we should run through on Thursday nights the NFC North games and what's going on in the division, because it is the best division in football, and each week there will be a lot of jostling for position as we go forward. So write that down, that from now on, we need to make sure we do that on Thursday nights, is preview these games. So thanks so much to you for adjusting your schedule and to my fading voice. Thanks everybody for the patience this week with the voice. I promise you it'll be back. And on Sunday night, I'm planning on, after who's playing Sunday night? Oh yeah, Giants and Bengals. Yeah, at some point on Sunday night, going live, breaking down the game's action, what it meant, the day's action, what all the games meant to the Vikings and so forth. So keep an eye out for that. I'll be going live on YouTube probably after the late slate and breaking things down from there. And then we're back to the regular week and the Vikings and lead up to the Vikings and Lions. So great stuff from everybody this week. I know, I can't wait. Manny, you and I Monday night, we'll be doing our thing. So thanks again for your time, and we'll talk to y'all later.
Football.